Kelechi and his allies find an ancient door in the forest that leads to a hidden realm where the soul collector is imprisoned. As the door opens, a swirling light reveals the soul collector in its most powerful form. The confrontation is fierce, with Kelechi's team facing dangerous traps and illusions. The soul collector's dark powers threaten to plunge their world into eternal darkness. In the village of Doro, life was simple. The people worked hard in the fields, raised their families, and celebrated every full moon with dances and songs. But there was one thing they feared most: the day a soul was taken by death. Death was not just the end of life in Doro. It was a passage to the spirit world, a journey all souls had to take. The villagers believed that after death, a person's soul would walk to the great baobab tree, where it would meet the ancestors and be guided to eternal peace. But lately, something strange has been happening in Doro. People were disappearing, not just dying, but vanishing without a trace. Old men and women, young boys and girls, even a few strong hunters, all gone. The village elders whispered about the soul collector, a spirit who had come to steal souls before their time. They said the soul collector didn't wait for death. It took people away in the dead of night, leaving nothing behind but cold wind. Kelechi was a brave young warrior, strong and fast, with sharp eyes that never missed anything. He lived with his mother, Malia, who always told him stories about the spirit world. Kelechi's father had died when he was very young, so he grew up hearing tales of the ancestors and their wisdom. One evening, as the sun was setting, Malia sat Kelechi down. "Kelechi," she said, her voice soft but serious. "The village is in danger. The soul collector is real and it has come to Doro. You must be careful." Kelechi frowned. He didn't believe in the stories of the soul collector. "Mother, these are just tales. Maybe people are leaving the village on their own. We don't know for sure." Malia shook her head. "No, Kelechi, the ancestors have warned us. The soul collector is coming for the strong, the brave, the young. You must be on your guard." That night, Kelechi couldn't sleep. He lay awake in his hut, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the stories his mother had told him. Outside, the wind howled, and the moon hid behind dark clouds. Suddenly, he heard a noise. A soft, rustling sound, like leaves being brushed by a breeze. He sat up, his heart pounding. He reached for his spear, ready to defend himself. As Kelechi stepped outside his hut, the village was eerily quiet. The only sound was the wind, whispering through the trees. His eyes scanned the darkness, looking for any sign of movement. And then he saw it. A shadow, moving swiftly between the trees, too fast to be human. Kelechi's grip tightened on his spear. His heart raced as he followed the shadow, careful not to make a sound. He moved silently like a lion stalking its prey. The shadow led him deeper into the forest, where the trees grew thicker and the air colder. Suddenly, it stopped, standing still as if waiting for him. Kelechi's breath caught in his throat. The shadow was not a man, nor was it an animal. It was tall, with glowing eyes and a form that seemed to shift with the wind. This was no ordinary being. This was the soul collector. "I know you," the shadow whispered, its voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "You are Kelechi, the warrior. You think you are brave, but are you brave enough to face me?" Kelechi felt a chill run down his spine. His hands trembled, but he kept his spear pointed at the creature. "I'm not afraid of you," he said, his voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside him. The soul collector laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "We shall see." In a flash, the shadow disappeared into the trees. Kelechi stood there, frozen for a moment, his mind racing. The creature had spoken to him. It knew his name. This was no ordinary spirit. The stories were true. The soul collector was real, and it was coming for the village. Kelechi ran back to the village, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to warn the others. They had to prepare. But when he arrived, the village was silent. He rushed to his mother's hut, but she was not there. Panic gripped him. He searched the village, calling out her name, but there was no answer. Malia was gone. The next morning, the village gathered in the center. The elders were troubled, their faces lined with worry. They had heard of the soul collector before, but no one had ever seen it. Now, with people disappearing, they had to act. Kelechi stood before the elders, his fists clenched. "We cannot wait any longer. We must stop the soul collector before it takes more lives." The head elder, a wise man named Amadi, looked at Kelechi with sad eyes. "We don't know how to fight a spirit. It is not of this world." "I've seen it," Kelechi said, his voice strong. "It's real, and it can be stopped. We must find its weakness." The elders murmured amongst themselves, unsure of what to do. But Kelechi was determined. He would not rest until he found the soul collector and brought his mother back. He gathered a small group of warriors, men and women who were willing to fight alongside him. They would journey deep into the forest, to the place where the spirits dwelled, and confront the creature. As they prepared to leave, Amadi approached Kelechi. "Be careful, my son. The soul collector is powerful. It feeds on fear and takes what is most precious. Stay strong, and do not let it see your fear." Kelechi nodded, his jaw set with determination. He would not fail. For his mother, for his village, he would face whatever dangers lay ahead. The group set off into the forest, the trees closing in around them like silent watchers. The air grew colder with every step, and the path became darker, as though the sun itself was afraid to enter this part of the woods. The warriors were silent, their faces grim, their hands tightly gripping their weapons. As they ventured deeper, strange things began to happen. They heard voices, soft whispers that seemed to come from the trees themselves. Kelechi's heart pounded in his chest, but he kept moving forward, his eyes focused on the path ahead. Suddenly, one of the warriors, a young man named Nuru, stopped. His eyes were wide with terror as he pointed to something in the distance. There, standing among the trees, was a figure. A tall, shadowy form with glowing eyes. The soul collector had found them. The warriors stood frozen, their weapons drawn, but their hands shaking. The soul collector moved closer, its form shifting and twisting like smoke. Kelechi stepped forward, his spear ready. "I'm not afraid of you," he said, his voice steady. The soul collector laughed again, a sound that made the hairs on the back of Kelechi's neck stand up. "We shall see," it whispered, before vanishing into the darkness. The air grew colder after the soul collector vanished. The warriors stood in silence, their breaths shallow and tense. Kelechi's heart pounded in his chest, but he refused to show fear. He glanced at his companions, their eyes wide with worry. "We must keep moving," he said, his voice firm. "If we hesitate, it will return." Nuru, still shaken, nodded slowly. "But how do we fight something that disappears like smoke?" Kelechi didn't have the answer, but he knew one thing for certain. They had to keep moving. They couldn't let fear control them. The group pressed on through the dense forest. The trees seemed to grow taller, their branches twisting together like dark fingers overhead. The deeper they went, the more unsettling the air became. Every now and then, they heard rustling sounds, but no one could see where they came from. The whispers, soft and chilling, followed them, as if the trees themselves were speaking to them. Hours passed. The sun was fading fast, and the group needed to find shelter. Kelechi spotted a clearing up ahead and led the group toward it. There, in the middle of the clearing, was a large stone, old and worn, covered in strange carvings. It was a shrine, one that Kelechi had heard of in the stories his mother told him. It was said that this shrine marked the boundary between the world of the living and the spirit world. "We'll camp here," Kelechi said, setting down his pack. "Stay close to the stone. The spirits respect this place." As the group settled down, a heavy silence fell over them. Nuru and the others sat close to the shrine, their weapons never far from their reach. The darkness of the forest surrounded them like a living shadow. Kelechi kept his spear close, his eyes scanning the trees. "I've never seen anything like this," one of the warriors, Kofi, whispered. "What do you think the Soul Collector wants?" Kelechi thought for a moment. "It takes souls before their time. But why? Maybe it's searching for something, or maybe..." His voice trailed off as a chilling thought crossed his mind. Maybe it's being controlled. The warriors exchanged uneasy glances. Could someone or something be controlling the Soul Collector? Just then, the wind picked up, howling through the trees like a scream. The flames of their small fire flickered and nearly went out. Kelechi stood up, his eyes scanning the forest. Something was coming. He could feel it. Suddenly, the shadows around the trees began to move. At first it was subtle, barely noticeable, but soon the shadows shifted and twisted, forming into shapes. Tall, dark figures with glowing eyes emerged from the darkness, surrounding the clearing. The Soul Collector had returned, but this time it wasn't alone. The warriors scrambled to their feet, drawing their weapons. Kelechi gripped his spear, his heart racing. The figures stepped closer, their eyes burning with an otherworldly light. "Stay close to the shrine," Kelechi shouted, hoping the stone would offer them some protection. The Soul Collector, taller than the others, stepped forward. Its voice, cold and sharp, echoed through the clearing. "You cannot escape." Kelechi felt fear gnawing at the edges of his mind, but he forced it down. He had to stay strong. He had to protect his friends. But how could they fight shadows? Suddenly, Nuru, overwhelmed with fear, made a run for the trees. "No, don't!" Kelechi shouted, but it was too late. The moment Nuru stepped beyond the shrine, one of the shadowy figures lunged at him, its dark hand reaching out. Nuru screamed, his body stiffening as the shadow wrapped around him. The warriors watched in horror as Nuru's body collapsed to the ground, lifeless. The Soul Collector laughed, its voice cruel and mocking. "You will all fall." Kelechi gritted his teeth, his fear turning into anger. He wouldn't let this happen. He wouldn't let the Soul Collector take any more lives. There had to be a way to stop it. Without warning, Kelechi turned to the stone shrine. His mother had always told him that the spirits respected it, that it held ancient power. Maybe, just maybe, it could help them. He placed his hands on the carvings, feeling the cold stone beneath his fingers. "Spirits of the ancestors," he whispered, his voice trembling. "If you can hear me, help us. Show us how to defeat this creature." For a moment, nothing happened. The shadows closed in, and Kelechi could feel the cold breath of the Soul Collector on his neck. But then, just as all hope seemed lost, the stone began to glow. A soft, white light spread from the carvings, illuminating the clearing. The shadows recoiled, hissing as the light touched them. Kelechi felt warmth flood through him, like the embrace of a loving hand. The ancestors were with him. The Soul Collector snarled, its form flickering as it tried to resist the light. But it was no match for the power of the ancestors. "We have to push it back," Kelechi shouted. "Use the light." The warriors, emboldened by the light of the shrine, raised their weapons and charged at the shadows. The figures shrieked and dissolved as the light touched them, retreating into the darkness. The Soul Collector, weakened but still defiant, glared at Kelechi. "This is not over," it hissed, before vanishing into the night. The clearing was quiet once more. The shadows were gone, and the cold, eerie feeling had lifted, but the battle was far from over. Kelechi knew that the Soul Collector would return, and next time, it would be even more dangerous. Kelechi and the elders worked tirelessly, reinforcing the village's defenses and making new plans. They gathered all the villagers and instructed them on how to protect themselves. Every day, the villagers practiced, learning to use simple weapons and set up traps around the village. Kelechi remained on high alert, knowing that the soul collector might not be gone for good. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Kelechi decided to revisit the dark forest. He hoped to find more clues about the soul collector and its weaknesses. The forest was as dense and eerie as ever, but Kelechi pressed on. The whispers of the forest seemed to grow louder, almost as if they were trying to guide him. He stumbled upon an old, abandoned hut hidden among the trees. The hut was covered in vines and looked as if it had not been used for years. Curious and cautious, Kelechi entered the hut. Inside, he found strange markings on the walls and a dusty old book lying on a wooden table. The book had a cover made of old, cracked leather, and the pages were filled with drawings of shadowy figures and ancient symbols. Kelechi carefully opened the book, trying to decipher the drawings. He realized that the book might hold secrets about the soul collector. Just as he was about to study it more closely, he heard a soft rustling noise behind him. Spinning around, he saw a shadow darting away into the darkness. "Who's there?" Kelechi called out, but there was no answer. He felt a chill run down his spine. He knew that the soul collector was never far away. Kelechi decided to leave the hut and return to the village with the book. The information inside could be crucial. Back in Doro, Kelechi showed the book to the elders. They gathered around, their faces filled with worry and curiosity. They examined the drawings and symbols, trying to understand their meaning. One elder, an old woman named Adama, recognized some of the symbols as ancient protection spells. She believed that the book might contain information on how to banish the soul collector for good. Adama began to study the book closely, while Kelechi and the warriors prepared for any new threats. The atmosphere in the village was tense. Every day, strange occurrences continued, shadows moving on their own, and whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. The villagers tried to stay calm, but fear was starting to creep back in. One night, while Kelechi was on patrol around the village, he heard a loud, eerie wail coming from the forest. It was the same sound he had heard before. He quickly gathered a few trusted warriors and headed into the woods, following the sound. The forest seemed alive with movement, and the whispers grew louder and more urgent. As they ventured deeper, they saw strange, glowing eyes watching them from the darkness. The shadows seemed to be closing in, and Kelechi felt a familiar chill. He realized that they were walking into a trap. Just then, a figure stepped out from behind a tree. It was the soul collector, more powerful and menacing than ever before. The soul collector spoke in a voice that echoed through the forest. "You think you can defeat me with mere protection spells? I will take what I want, and there is nothing you can do to stop me." Kelechi and his warriors prepared to fight, their hearts pounding. The battle began, and it was clear that the soul collector had grown stronger. The warriors fought bravely, using the light from their torches and the protective spells they had learned. Despite their efforts, the soul collector was relentless, attacking with more fury than before. In the midst of the battle, Adama arrived with the book. She had deciphered an important spell that might drive the soul collector away. Kelechi and the warriors gathered around her as she began to chant the ancient words from the book. The air crackled with energy, and a bright light filled the forest. The soul collector hissed and writhed, its shadowy form struggling against the light. With a final, powerful burst, the light enveloped the soul collector, and it let out a piercing scream. The figure began to dissolve, and the shadows retreated, leaving the forest quiet once more. Exhausted but victorious, Kelechi and the warriors returned to the village. They were greeted with cheers and relieved smiles. The soul collector had been driven away, but Kelechi knew that they needed to remain vigilant. The battle had been fierce, and the village had narrowly escaped destruction. Adama continued to study the book, hoping to uncover more secrets that might help them in the future. Kelechi stood watch,
Knowing that the peace they had won was fragile, the village slowly returned to normal, but the shadow of the Soul Collector's presence lingered, a reminder that they must always be prepared.
As the days passed, Kelechi and the villagers rebuilt and strengthened their defenses. They knew that the dark forces of the forest were still out there, waiting for their chance to strike. But with bravery, knowledge, and the power of the ancestors, they were ready to face whatever came next. The story of their struggle would be remembered for generations, a tale of courage and hope against the shadows that sought to consume them. As the village of Doro settled into a fragile peace, strange omens continued to unsettle the villagers. Shadows seemed to flicker in the corners of their vision, and the whispers of the forest grew more frequent. Kelechi and the warriors stayed vigilant, patrolling the edges of the village and the dark forest. One night, Kelechi had a vivid dream of the Soul Collector, not destroyed but imprisoned in an ancient, hidden realm. He awoke with a sense of urgency, realizing that the threat might not be completely over. Determined to find the truth, Kelechi and a few trusted allies set out to uncover the secrets of the hidden realm. They followed clues from the book and ventured deeper into the forest than ever before. The journey was perilous, filled with traps and illusions designed to protect the realm. Finally, they reached an ancient stone door, covered in mystical symbols. As they unlocked it, a powerful swirling light burst forth, revealing a new, formidable challenge. The Soul Collector was waiting, more powerful than ever, and ready to unleash a new wave of darkness upon the world.